being recorded.
We have tremendous interest in the Creo cabling and the harness manufacturing extension. So some of the people on this call today are current and former users of Creo cabling and harness, but PTC added a new module called Harness Manufacturing Extension 2.5 years ago. And what this does, it is designed to, it gives you more additional functionality to create manufacturing documentation, but it just creates that documentation much easier and 10 times faster than you would manually creating it in the old Creo harness manufacturing functionality. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Adam. But today on this call, we have some people that do upfront design in harness for harnesses and cables, and we have some manufacturing companies that take that data or have to create manufacturing documentation from multiple phases throughout the process. So you're going to see it soup to nuts today, and I will turn it over to Adam.
Thank you very much, Jim. So my name is Adam Manfredoni. I'm an applications engineer with PTC, and I'm responsible for the Creo product line. Jim had asked me to cover harness design in Creo Parametric today, and so when I think about that, I think of three main tools in the Creo toolset, and that's Creo Schematics for my upfront diagrams, the cabling module for routing, and then the harness manufacturer for creating my flattened harness drawing. So I'm going to focus on those three things today. But if we start out with schematics, and as I go through this today, there's a couple different ways to attack this problem. One could be from the very beginning, from the diagram perspective, all the way through the process, or maybe we want to start just at the cabling section and move forward from there. I'm going to try to show and talk to and demonstrate a little bit of both today. So if I start out with Creo Schematics, what this is a diagramming tool which allows me to build many different types of diagrams, whether I'm doing harness design with block, circuit, and wiring interconnect diagrams, or whether I'm doing piping diagrams, process flow, HVAC, hydraulics, and pneumatics. And this is all a function of how you set up your catalogs, your library of symbols that exist inside the Creo Schematics tool. Once I have that library set up, I have those in place, I can build any type of schematic that I need to. It has a nice central catalog capability, so if I have multiple designers working on Creo Schematics, they can all pull from that same library, that same catalog. It comes with a basic library, but that's also something that's easily customizable. It has a built-in librarian process for controlling the library, and we do have some third-party partners like Virtual Interconnect, which provide industry standard libraries of symbols and components. So there's several different ways to attack the initial setup of Creo Schematics. Once I've created my schematics, then there's a number of things I also want to do that. Once I have that diagram information in place, I want to generate reports. I want to report on maybe from to lists or components or any number of things that I want to glean out of that diagram and report on. And this can be broken up into the design, the catalogs, the blocks, the groups, the fibers. I can search through this and I can format that with different columns, and then I can use that to create tables that I can then place right on the diagrams themselves. It's all integrated with Windchill, so for your product lifecycle management, I can push all this into Windchill and then relate these diagram back to the 3D designs or to other data within the Windchill system. If you want to do some automation type tasks, there is an open Java API, so you can do some custom development. And we also have a couple of partners that are really good at this stuff that have done a lot of development in this particular area also. There is a eSimulate tool, gives you some basic capability, and we get the light version comes with your license of Creo Schematics. Now, once we get into the schematics tool, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see me work in the Design Explorer, and that's kind of I'm going to start out with a blank sheet of paper, and this is where you structure your folders, your sheets, and how you want that design set up, because any design is really a combination of different sheets and capabilities. I might have block, circuit, wiring diagrams in all within the same design, and how do I want to structure that data. Inside that, you're also going to have the Catalog Explorer. So this is where I'm going to go and I'm going to pull my symbols from. This is all to where, if you have the permissions, you can create new symbols and information, whether they're, again, block, circuit, or wiring diagram symbols, which often can be different for the same component. anything inside of Creo Schematics has parameters associated to it. So whether it's a port, a block, a group, a fiber, whatever it might be, it's not just dumb graphics that's sitting on the screen. When I select the symbol and I select on the properties of that, it's going to show me all the attribute information associated to that. And so this is one way I can go through and build families of instances, families of symbols by using some of this parameter information. And then you can have labels. So if I want to put things inside my schematic, but I want labels on it so you can see exactly what it is, exactly what it represents, and then you can associate these labels back to that parameter information that exists inside the drawing. I mentioned eSimulate. Well, you get the light version with Creo Schematics, and that gives you circuit analysis, wire analysis. It gives you some voltage margin capabilities. It also gives you wire overload detection, so it gives you some basic functionality. There isn't a full version of the tool. Our partner, Virtual Interconnect, develops this tools, but that's something that they resell independently. And then once I get done with all my data, I've got my schematics ready to roll, or at least that initial version of it. I'm going to pass it into Creo Parametric. This is where I'm going to take advantage of XML. So I'm going to generate an XML file out of Creo Schematics, which is going to include all my component information, all my fiber and wire information, my cable information, all the from to information, all the spool information, everything I need to get started in Creo Parametric and routing those particular cables. And then I'm going to flip over to the other side and I'm going to say, all right, now I'm inside. I'm the mechanical person. I'm routing that information inside of my 3D design. And so you have the cabling module to do just that. And this gives you a bunch of tools to route the wires between the simple pick and place to auto route to networks to a number of different techniques. And I'll show just a couple of those today. Once you have that basic wire, that fiber, that harness routed within your system, I can apply bundles, tie wraps, tapes, markers, so I can create as much of a virtual prototype as I need to and to represent that design with as much detail as desired. This is all parametric, so if I move a connector and I regenerate, the wires are going to regenerate and reconnect and update to the particular lengths and that type of thing. So you have that full capability within the system. And then the third piece of this is now want to take this and I want to create my 2D drawing for manufacturing. So how do I go about creating that flattened harness drawing in a very automated fashion? And that's where we have the harness manufacturing extension. And what this is going to do is going to give me a fully annotated stick layout, a from to report with the name of the wire, the spool of the wire, the length of the wire, and then all the from to information. So it's kind of like a cut list and a from to report all kind of built in together. It's going to give you pinout tables for each and every single connector within the context of the design. It's going to give you a 3D view and it's going to give you a bill of material. And that bill of material is going to be the components, the wires, the tie wraps, the markers, the bundles, everything exists inside that design is going to be incorporated in that. So if we look at the overall process, I start out with Creo Schematics to create my diagrams. I export my XML. I pull that into Creo Parametric. I route my wires. I then jump right over into the harness manufacturing extension, create my 2D drawing. So these are kind of the basic steps. And then all of this, of course, managed through Windchill using the Worker Manager as the interface to pass that data back and forth from Creo Schematics into the Windchill PLM environment to do all my data management, my configuration management, all that information within there.
Adam, can you go back to the slide previous there, the one that showed the three tools?
One moment.
Right back, right there. So some of you have different responsibilities, so you do not have to start out in Creo Schematics. We have customers that just start in the Creo cabling design. If there's benefits and features to doing both. And then on this call also are some harness manufacturing companies that they would do the back end. They would either take the information from their customers and create the manufacturing documentation. Sometimes the manufacturing companies will have to create the cabling design from information sent to them from their customers. So some of you are going to do this entire process. Some of you on the call might be manufacturers, but you might want to do HMX because what you give to your vendor, your harness manufacturing vendor, affects time, quality, and cost. And also reduction in questions and collaboration and errors and mistakes. So, all right, Adam, I just wanted to mention that you do not have to start in schematics. You can start anywhere in this process. Go ahead.
That is a great point, Jim, because if I go into, 50 different accounts, they're all going to do things a little different. Some pick up right here with the cabling design and move forward. It depends where your starting point is, what your process is. We can adapt to different environments. With that being said, let's dive into a little bit of software. So I'm going to start with the schematic piece of it and then kind of move through each of the individual components inside this. So if I'm starting out and I have electrical engineers who are doing my wiring diagrams for me, they may work in multiple different types of diagrams. They may start out in a concept design and do a block interface diagram where it has just the units themselves, it has their basic connections between them, and it knows that I got 6 different units or electrical boxes of some type, and I know I have a connection from here to there or from here to there. And the nice thing about this, like I said, anything inside here, any of these symbols, these are all built up and they have attributes and parameters associated with them. And so I can go through and I can apply whatever information is necessary or applicable for those particular units. So I can start here and kind of lay out maybe at the beginning of design, kind of that intro. What do I have? What am I building here? And what are the major pieces and how do they fit together? And then I can start breaking this down into more detailed design. So I have a circuit diagram here, and which is giving my, the standard symbols that you might see for different components. So I got relays on here and some other components. Now, again, if I go through as well as the fibers themselves or the connections, if I select any one of these, again, these have attributes associated with them. And the nice about this is I can create a family of these by just bringing in information from Excel. So I can apply a data set and say, I want a 12-volt version of this. I'm going to select the one that's 12 volt, and then all the attribute information will update based upon that basically information that's coming from Excel. So I know exactly what information is associated with that design. So the name, the layer, the manufacturer, the model name, the number of pins, the rating, whatever information is applicable to that particular design. So you can go through and build that. And the nice thing about that is if I can come through here, I can come through and look at that and say, all right, this is all that information that's coming from Excel. So if I look at it, it's just a matter of importing and exporting Excel data inside here to drive these. So whether they're relays, connectors, or whatever that particular design needs to be. This way, I can very easily create a family of symbols rather than having to create numerous symbols to represent every single one of these. Now, once I get to this point, I might then go through and create a wiring diagram. So here's a wiring interconnect. So this shows me the individual connectors, every single pin. It then shows me the fibers between them. It shows all the decorations for the cables, as well as all the information associated to that particular design. If I come and look at properties in this, again, even the wires get down to that level where they have all that proper information associated to it. And then even the text itself has properties. So if I look at that, you can associate that text to a particular wire or fiber or anything else inside the design. So you can come through and look at that information, and then you can associate this and have that label be anything you want. So in this case, it's a combination of several things. It's a combination of a wire prefix, a name, a color code, and a wire gauge. So you can go through and you can specify your labels using the attribute information associated to that particular design. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you set that information up. And then just to go back a sec, you have that Design Explorer, which I talked about just in the slide deck. So this gives me the ability to go through, here's my design. When you start one from scratch, it's going to be just that upper folder, and I decide what's going to be inside here. And so I can start breaking this down into folders and subfolders, depending on how and where I want to store that information. And then you have the Catalog Explorer itself. So if I want to come into the catalog, I can come through and select components. So I can come down through here, and if I know where things are, I can go through and just browse my way through and select on the different components inside here. And if I select on through this, it gets me down even to the point where I can see all that attribute information. And let me unlock my catalog so I can see that real quick. So I have it locked because maybe you have a bunch of users. You don't want everyone just changing the catalog at will. You may want to have a librarian or an administrator that goes through and just does that. But now I can come through as the user and I can look at properties and that type of thing and see exactly what's associated to that particular attribute or that particular symbol that's inside the design. Now, maybe I have a fairly exhaustive library. The other way you can go throughout looking for some of this information is by using the report tool. And if I go to the report tool, I can come through here and say I want to do an inventory on the local catalog, and I want to look at blocks, groups, so if different components inside here. I can set columns and sort and set criteria to search by. And then once I create these, the nice part about that is I can reuse them. So if, say, for example, I want to find a switch. So it says I want to look in my local catalog. I want to look at blocks. I want to report full name, description, and model name. I want to sort by the full name, and I want to the criteria to be anything with description that matches switch. So now I can go through and sort by that, and it finds one in the catalog. If I want to see that particular item right in the catalog and see its catalog entry, I can go to right here, and then to place it, you simply drag and drop it. If I drag it on a line, an existing fiber, it'll break that fiber and place that, or I can just place it anywhere I want just on the face of the drawing. Now, once I get to that point, again, this has attribute information associated with it, so I can go to the parameters and properties on this, and I can apply data sets if I have multiples of these, for example, these button switches. Now, next thing I might want to do is connect all this together. So what I'm going to do is simply go into my diagramming, tell what I want to route some fibers, and then I'm going to select in the library for the particular fibers that I'm interested in. So maybe on this one, I want a yellow 16 gauge wire, and I want to come from here and I want to route it into there. I can also at any point, once I'm inside here, double click on this and then drag these and change what that routing looks like. I can also, if I use specific ones over and over again, maybe there's a certain list of fibers that I use all the time, you can create custom shortcuts and custom tabs on your screen. So say, for example, I want to select that blue. So instead of having to go to the library and do all that, I can do it all right from here. So it makes it much simpler to go through when I use things all the time and over again. So you have some of that capability. Or I can route cables. So fibers are single wires, cables are a grouping of wires. So if I want to come down here, I go into my cables and I want a 3-conductor shielded cable, hit the OK button, and then I can just go through and select, and it's going to go ahead and place that for me. So it gives me a green, a black, and a red wire, and then it shows all the decorations to show that that is indeed a cable. Once I've added all this, you notice that I have these tables. Well, these were tables just that were built using the search engine. So if I come through and update the table, you know, it's going to update. And now if I come down here, I now have the button switch added to that. So it's just a simple matter of clicking on the table, asking it to update, and hitting OK. And now you see that it updates. So here I have a simple from to list, which just has the wire name, the from component, the from port, the to component, and the to port. And again, these can be customized with these tables to show any content that you need, any content that you want. So that gives you just a little bit of a taste of what's going on inside of the schematics tool. Once I get to this point, now I have the ability to export out. And so if I just want to do documentation, if I want to dump out CGMs, DWGs, DXFs, PDFs, that type of thing, I can do that all right from here. When I'm working through the workgroup manager and I check this in, it automatically creates a PDF for me. So that's part of the check-in process. So that's automated. I can also go through, and if I'm a PTC customer, and maybe I'm using Windchill and I have Creo View, I can export an EDA file. And then I can open this up inside of Creo View. So for downstream users who want to interrogate that diagram, they can do that from here. And when they select on a symbol in Creo View, it'll act like just the symbols the same way it acts here. As a group, it will show the parameter information, the properties, and so you'll be able to work through it that way. Or if I want to push this data out for reuse in Creo Parametric to do my cabling, I'm just going to hit the XML file. Tell it I want it to be cabling. I don't want the whole design or maybe just the current sheet. I want to enter a name here and hit the OK button. And then you're going to generate that XML data. At that point, I'm going to switch gears. And just for your information, just to kind of point out something here that I like to point out to a lot of customers is that if you go to learningconnector.ptc.com, there is a nice tool in here. So all I have to do is up at the top is type in whatever my keyword is. So I typed in schematics and it gives me a set of tutorials, which are 3 to 5 minute videos on different topics that exist for schematics. If I want to see a more exhaustive list of those, I can say see more tutorials. This also goes into PC University or e-learning system and finds any courses associated to that. It goes into ptc.com under the support site, looks in our knowledge base, finds any articles in there that are associated to that, as well as into the help center. So this is kind of one-stop shopping to get information on topics that exist for Creo schematics. But that also works for cabling or for HMX. So when I mean Creo parametric, I can do it within the embedded browser and do the same thing and look at courses, knowledge base articles, help center documents, that type of thing. So Learning Connector, kind of a nice tool to work with. Now, for a lot of you, this is going to be your starting point where you're not going to really do the diagrams at all. You're going to start right here, and you're going to either have a library of connectors and place those in an assembly and then start routing between those connectors, or maybe you have the full design and you're going to start routing within the context of that and build your own harness assembly. So there's several different ways you could kind of attack this. So from here, all I'm going to do is go to my applications menu and go into the cabling module. Now, once I'm in the cabling module, I can have one or more harnesses that exist inside this design. So you simply tell what harness you want to work on or create a brand new harness, and then you can come through here. And the first thing that I like to do is if I'm working with that schematic data, I like to work with the logical references. So the first thing I'm going to do is import that Creo schematics data, which is the XML file, and I want to use that inside here. So we'll grab that XML file. And then what that allows me to do is then take advantage of the other tools under logical data. So one of them is auto designate. So what you're going to see here is a table that says, what's the reference designator? And that's coming from schematics in this case. What's the ref model? This is the model name that's coming from Creo Schematics. And what's the 3D cabling component here in Creo Parametric? So you're trying to create a one-to-one correlation between what's coming from the 2D logical information, or maybe that's even Excel data from a from-to type thing, and you can go through and you can match these up. And it will auto-match if it can. If it can't, you'll able to go through. For example, I have multiple connectors which are the same name. It wants to know which one has a ref des of VG1 and which has a ref des of VG2. And so this way I can now apply that information here and match all the information up from the 2D to 3D. So now it knows what needs to route to where. I can also look at spools. And one of the things I could do is create spools from the logical information also. So if I've already created them in Creo Schematics, why do I want to create them again? And you can see that those all exist here now. So I can pull all this information, populate my 3D design with all that data. Or if I'm starting here from scratch, create your spools. They exist in a library. You're going to be able to reuse them right here. And you're going to be able to designate manually. And I'll show you in a minute how to do just that. So you can do your routing right here without the need for that logical data that's coming from a 2D tool. And then last but not least, I can do a comparison. So if I come through here and execute that, it gives me the ability to do a comparison. So up at the top, here's my cabling assembly in Creo Parametric. Here's my XML data. It shows me I got wires labeled W1 to W7 as well as a cable. Those haven't been routed, so this is blank. It does show that I have all these connectors and components, and it does show that I have a one-to-one link between all those because that's what I did when I went through and did auto designate. And it also shows me that I transferred all the spool information from one to the other. So now I have that one-to-one linkage. I'm tying all that together. So I want all that to match by the end of the day. Now, once I get to that point, if I've gone through and I've used the schematic information, the next thing I want to do is route my wires because it understands what the components are. It understands where everything needs to be routed to. I've gone through and done all my connections. But the first thing I like to do is I like to route my network. And so you'll notice that this got this dotted line in here. That's my network. That's a path that I'd like the wires to take if at all possible. And I'm going to designate when I route these to use that network. But if I want to add segments to that network, it's just as easy selecting a few points, or in this case, just selecting the locations and connecting this together. So maybe that's the network I want to use. And once I have that, now I can come through here and route my cables. Now here I can create wires from scratch, create cables from scratch, or I can retrieve cables from that logical information. So in this case, I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab everything. And I'm going to say I'm going to route everything here. and I want to do it via network. You'll notice that if I do simple route, it looks very different. All it will do is do a kind of a shortest distance between 2 points, taking into consideration the characteristics of the spool for things like minimum bend radius and that type of thing. But that's kind of ugly for this particular design. That's not what I want. So I'm going to go through and tell it to follow that network. And now I get this nice, clean look of that harness, and it's all routed the way it should through the grommet in the center and into the individual components. At that point, I'm just going to hit accept. I'm going to shade this out, and you're going to see that that even the wires come in at the correct color. So if inside of the spool I have color set, and I have that color set inside my color map inside of Creo Parametric, it'll automatically associate that color in here. So if I come through to view and I look at my appearances and oh, one more time. And say, for example, I want to open up, maybe I have one for wires, so I have a bunch of colors in here for wires. So now it'll go through and it'll bring those in and it'll go through and associate those automatically. Now, a couple things that I can do inside here while I'm here is that, for example, maybe I want to go through. Matter of fact, let's deviate just for a second. Maybe I'm coming from the other side of the fence. Maybe I don't want to come through and attack this from a 2D schematic. I want to do it all right here. So I have a couple of new connectors that I want to add inside here. And let's route some wires between them just from scratch manually right here in Creo cabling. So the first thing I'm going to do is, again, you're going to stay in your cabling module, but instead of auto designate, you're going to do a manual designation. I'm going to come through and I'm going to select the component I want to designate. I'm going to turn on my coordinate systems. And you'll notice when I do that, that every single one of these components has one or multiple coordinate systems to represent the pins or the location you want to route to. If I want to route to a single location like this one and show it all kind of as a bundle, that's fine. Or if I want to route to each individual pin, I can do that also. But in this case, I want to designate not only the component, but it's also its entry port. It gives me the option to include an internal length of that cable. So if I wanted to extend into there a quarter of an inch, so that gets accounted for when I do the wire lengths, you can do that from right here. And then once I have those designated, now I can go through and route wires. So if I want to come through here and I want to route my cables, I want to create a wire from scratch. I want it to be orange 16 as the spool. I want it to use the network. And then I can come through here and say I want to route from hold on a second. I thought those were designated, but I'm going to have to go back and make sure they are. So let me go through and designate that one. And then again, we'll do our entry port. And then last but not least, we'll do that last one. Thought I had set those up for you folks, but obviously I didn't. All right, that needs a unique ref des, so it has light 1, so let's just call it light 2. And then again, we'll just hit our entry ports. All right, so now let's come back to routing our cables and our wires. Let's come through and set our that we want per network. We want a specific spool that we're going to use, and then let's come through from that entry port to this one here. And so now we can see that we have that wire routed. And I can show these in thick cable or I can show them in thin cable. In thin, you see all the location points. If I want to go through and modify that, I can come through and add a location. Maybe I want it to route, connect on the floor. Maybe I have a cable clamp there or something that I'm going to use, so I can put that in place. I can also go through here and maybe I want to splice off there and connect to somewhere else. I can insert a component, tell it's going to be a splice, select the splice component of interest. And this one, in this case, is just really a set of coordinate systems. It's just in and two outs. So if we come through and look at that, there we go. I want to set the entry port as being that in and the cable location being there. And let's go through and accept that. So now if we look at the design, we can see that the path is going to be in to that one. All right, so now I have that in place. If I want to splice off that now, I can come through and route a cable. Just going to select on it. Again, select my spool that I'm interested in. And then in this one, I'm just going to say I want to then go from out to, and I want to come over here and tie into that. Um, you can do that simple or per network. I'm just going to do it simple. And then in this case, I can also go through here and add a location. And now I have those wires routed. And again, I can look at the thin or the thick cable version of that to kind of look at that information. I'm going to turn off my quarter system just to make it a little cleaner to look at. And then from here, there's some other things I can do. For example, I can create a bundle. And I'm going to go through and say this bundle is going to be, maybe it's going to be like a shrink tube. And I can find what the information is. And from here, you can say, all right, for example, inside the spool, I want it to be shrink tube. I want the name to be a certain thing. It's going to be a sheath. What's the sheath type? So again, you have some options in here, what that's going to be like. And then you can come through here, set your wall thickness, whatever that might be of interest. There we go. Your minimum bend radius, any of that information that is applicable, you're going to put all that information in. If you want to set it to a certain color, go ahead and do that right from here. And then you can say, where do I want to route to? In this case, I want to route from here to here. I'm going to select everything, but I don't want the network and I don't want that cable. So we'll take those back off. And now if I come through and look at thick cables, you notice I now have this nice section in here, which is that bundle, which is that shrink tube that goes on and looks at those particular wires that go through that connection. If I want to do things like markers, tapes, and tie wraps, very easy to go through and place those, set them on your design, pick your locations, do all this inside of the thin wire so you can select your locations and where those exist and where you want to place the particular information. Now, once I do this, I get all this information on here, you then have the ability to access cabling up at the top. And this gives you the ability to go through and maybe I want to look at all the information associated to this harness. And so this gives me the harness name and then all the individual segments inside there, including their name, the name of the cable, the name of the spool, the length, the minimum bend radius, the thickness, all that information that gets pushed inside here. And if I wanted to save that out, you can also save that out to an information file, which is open up in any word processing tool. You can also look at a harness wire list. This is giving me all the wires, the color, the length, the from, the to. Or if I want to do physical routing, I can see what the path of something is by simply selecting on it. It's going to highlight, or I can see the length of something. So if I select on that particular wire, I know that's 23.1956 inches. So it gives me all this information right here. So if I wanted to kind of just interrogate it right on the fly, I can do that all right from here. Now, once I get to this point and I have all this information routed, what I may want to do is then come through here and let me close out of this. Maybe I want to add some additional information to this design. So a customer recently said, well, I want to add solder, but I don't really want to model the solder. I just want it to show up in the BOM. I want it to show up in the parts list. So one of the ways you could do that is I can create what we call a bulk item. And so let's go through and just say that's going to be solder. And a bulk item is just a set of parameters. So if I wanted to put some attributes in here associated to a specific, so if I wanted to add them as to the material or any other descriptive information that's specific or functional requirements specific to that material, you could add those as attributes right inside of here. And so now you see that solder shows up. It's got its own unique little icon to show that it's a bulk item. But now if I want to go through and flatten this out, I can simply then come into the third piece of the puzzle, which is the harness manufacturing extension. And this is an automated piece of software that we've been selling since about the Creo 3 timeframe. It was developed by one of our partners, Virtual Interconnect. And what this allows me to do is go through, pick the harness of interest, simply set and select a format that I want that to take. And then also you have the ability, it will create some default tables, but if I want to tweak those tables from a perspective of a wire list, a cavity table, or the bill of material, those are the three ones it creates. I can specify the names, the layers, the spools, the types, the lengths, any columns that I want to create, and as well as create the header names for those, so I can customize that information. I can also tell it whether I want to show balloons and reference designator information associated to each one of the components when it creates that stick figure view. I can come through and tell it I want it to create a BOM file, a wireless file. Again, there's a number of different options here that you can set depending on how you want it to show up. At that point, all I do is hit the flatten button and I let it run. And it's going to go through here and it's going to interrogate the design and then start creating that flattened drawing for me. If it finds anything that are issues, so for example, it found a spool with mixed units, it can handle that, it can deal with it, it just wants to report it, or if there's any incomplete cables or other issues associated with your design, it'll show you all that. So there's some nice diagnostic tools inside here. And then you can look at the diagram itself and you can see a number of things that it automatically creates very, very quickly. So here we have our cut list, which is our name, our spool, and our length. But we also have the from to information associated to this table also. We have our stick figure, and that gives me the components themselves, and you can choose to show these as shaded or no hidden line or wherever you want. It's just a drawing view. I can move, any of this around to kind of clean it up. It usually takes a little bit of cleanup work to get these to where I want. It's just going to show me where I have shrink tube, where my cables extend to. It's going to show me the individual lengths of all these particular legs of the design. Again, you can go through and kind of clean this up wherever you need. You might run into areas here where, gosh, that's awful close. Maybe I don't want that to intersect. Maybe what I want to do is kind of clean that up. This is where what it does is it automatically creates a kind of a manufacturing assembly associated to this. So I can open up that manufacturing assembly. I can come up to the sketch that's used to define how this is going to look, and I can say, I want to modify that, and I want to change it such that I want to move that out of the way. So let's go ahead and change that to say 60 degrees. Accept that. Now I know I have a nice clean view here. I don't have any intersecting components. And then when I come back into the drawing itself, it's going to reflect that change that I made to that particular design. You also have pinouts for every single one of the connectors. So it's going to show me the number of pins or positions associated to each one of these. What wires exist in which ports or which pins. If there's terminals and seals associated, those also it'll report that information. It has a 3D view, so if I want to go through and modify that, and I'm going to go through and change the orientation, and then let's go through and just modify the scale on this and make it a little smaller. All right, so then if I wanted to make that to get into a hidden line or no hidden line or whatever I want, I can go through and modify that any way I want. And then last but not least, you have your bill of material. So your quantity, your item number, your part number, your description. It gives me all my wires down at the bottom. Here's my shrink tube. So it even gives me that bundle information. Here's all my connectors and all my components associated with that. And then even that item that we created for the solder up at the top. So you have all that information that gets automatically created here inside the harness manufacturing extension. Now, if we wanted to look at something that was a little more complicated, that's a very simple view here. But I have another one here that I want to show you. And we can show that very quickly. So here is an assembly. This one's got several different harnesses inside it. It's got this main harness here, and I'm going to open up just so you can get a better look out of it. And so, you know, a nice medium-sized harness as far as number of wires and number of connectors that are associated with it. You know, a lot more than that simple one I showed you. But the application really handles it in very much the same way. Hold on, let's go ahead and close that other one. I don't want it to use that same format. I want it to build its own. So let's come through here now. Let's go to harness manufacturing. One second. All right. Okay. I must have redone one of these, so let's go through and just bring it up. There it is. All right. So there's a version of that right now, but if I want to go through and update that, all I have to do is come through here, select on this, go to my harness manufacturing. My apologies. Sometimes I do a lot of these, and sometimes I forget to reset everything. Okay, let's erase all that information. And while I'm doing this, if there's any questions, now would be a great time to break out any questions that you folks might have.
If you have questions, there's a Q&A panel. Just feel free to type them in there and we'll be happy to answer them for you.
Let me just reset this real quick, and then there we go. So here we have our harness manufacturing. Let's just go through, grab our drawing, and you notice even with one that's a little more complex, if you if you just time this, and it takes the process literally down from hours to minutes to get to this point in your design. Now, this might not be 100% complete. You might get 80 to 90% of it. You're still going to have to do some cleanup work. You might want to add some notes. You might want to add a couple of different things inside here, but it's getting a vast majority of the work done. So we're finding that if you're doing medium or large hemp assembly, large harnesses, you're going from hours or possibly even days to literally minutes with a lot of this stuff when you're going through and building that. So just that quickly, it went through and created a much more complex flattened harness drawings. Again, same number of wires, spools, lengths, so your cut list information. A little more complex on the as far as what we're looking at within the context of the our view and our diagram. The things that you're going to pretty much have to clean up inside here is a lot of these labels. So as these get more complex, the default position of the labels isn't always where I want it to be. So those are going to have to be moved around. Again, you might want to reposition and move some of these as far as the angle so that you eliminate some of the interference conditions. So if, say, for example, this one here, I'd want to rotate down. This one I'm going to rotate over. So you're going to go through and there's some cleanup work that you're going to probably have to do on these things. Again, you need to look at just the number of tables that it developed for each one of those components. But again, we're seeing a view of the connector, all the pins, the wires in which pins they're associated to. Again, our 3D view of this, and then all the way down to our bill of material. So with that, I am open to questions, comments. Anyone who is maybe has touched these tools before, or if you haven't, anything that you want to bring up now would be this would be a perfect opportunity. We got about 10 minutes left in the session.
See, I'm not seeing any questions in the queue right now, Adam. No hands raised.
Andrew, I don't know if the Q&A button works, because I couldn't type in a question.
Now, if there are any follow-up questions, if we're just running into system problems through WebEx, you can forward all that information over to Jim. I will be more than happy to respond to any questions, or if there's any follow-up that needs to be done afterwards this, just route it all through Jim. We'll make sure and get to all of it.
You don't see any, Andrew, because I can't use the Q&A. Not that I was going to type in a question, but.
No, it doesn't. I'm not seeing any questions right now. The Q&A is working. Looks like we have one. How many wires and cables are in this assembly shown on screen, Adam?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if there's a specific way to, you can go through the
On
harness
the report?
assembly. So if you come through here, you can look at a couple of different things. If I come into the cabling module, I can come into cabling here, look at the wire list, and I can just go through and look at it this way. So which looks like we have, it doesn't give me a specific number or listing in here. It just shows all the different wires. It doesn't tell me exactly how many. Now I might be able to do that through model check to give me a specific count, but this one is, it just gives me a listing of.
Yeah, but you would get a cut list in your harness manufacturing, so you could tell.
Exactly.
There.
You're gonna get this same information in there. So it may not give you the exact list or number, or we can also look at that harness drawing, and there should be a fine number in here. That's something you can also add as like a fine number on this also, so that you can see just that total quantity. It will just give you 1 through whatever. But in this case, it's just giving you the listing of what the name is, but not a specific count. But again, that's something I should be able to just do through model check also. A lot of times it'll go through and generate that information for me.
We got a couple other questions going on. Follow-up one to that, I think, was can you create a harness by importing a to from table?
I can bring in Excel type information to help populate that initial step, kind of in the same way that I did with the XML, but the XML gives me a little more information because it's pulling it right out of the schematic. But you can definitely import some of that that information in if you have a CSV type format.
Okay. And then another question around schematics was, where's the best place to find generic databases for schematics? So things like switches, lights, and simple stuff that you'd want to use.
All right, a couple things let me just touch on here. If I go into the schematics tool and I go to get started, first of all, you have a sample catalog. So if you go through and create that, it's going to use the sample catalog and create a sample design. And then I can use the tutorial that's inside there along with that basic catalog. And so creating new designs, reporting, interfacing with cabling, configuring the work environment, it gives me some basic information there. You can go to pretty much any of the vendors that create connectors or components, and they will give you or be available to download step files or some type of data associated to that particular object. So if you want to populate the 3D database, 3D catalog of information, then you would need to just add the attribute information and a coordinate system. For the 2D design type information, one of the things that we've seen a lot of our customers do is work with one of our vendors, which is Virtual Interconnect. So if you go right inside of Creo Schematics, there's a link to their site. So I can come in here and I can look at this and see that they have component libraries, they have symbol libraries. For example, IEEE 315, they have a P&ID library for piping, an EN 60617, and then they'll also work with you on creating custom libraries. They also have component libraries here also. So these can be smart part libraries, so the parts that go with the symbols, or you can also, again, you can work with them and they'll design and develop libraries for you. So that's all kind of part of what I consider the implementation plan. So again, we have some really great third-party partners like Virtual Interconnect, as well as a few others that specialize in routed systems that will help you set up your libraries, that will do training, that will help you with your implementation, setting up your best practices and that type of thing.
Great. I think with that, we have all the questions in queue answered. So probably safe to wrap it up.
Thank you very much for your time today. Again, if there's any follow-up questions, please forward them on through Jim Gilmore. We'll do our best to get everything answered for you folks.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
All right, thank you very much.